Rolling sound, quiet. Here we go. Reading. 126.7. And starting right when action.
Hi, Chad Matthews coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas with the Lone Star Film Festival. In today's film talk, I welcome writer, director, actor Aleksandra Szczepanowska, whose feature film Touch is a story about a Caucasian woman struggling to live in China with her Chinese husband, and things get really complicated when she starts having an affair and her world begins to unravel. Touch has played at numerous film festivals since its debut at the New York City Independent Film Festival, where it won Best Film and Best Director awards. Aleksandra joins us from New York. Welcome to the Lone Star Film Festival.
Thank you so much for having us.
My pleasure. Thank you for submitting your film and for letting us screen it. We're really looking forward to that. So this is your first feature film. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And, you know, a school of thought that a lot of people have is write what you know or write about a setting that you're familiar with. And you know Mandarin, and you seem to have a very good finger on the pulse of Chinese culture. So talk to me a little bit about your connection to China and how this film came about.
Well, my connection to China is very long and very deep. It started when I was 7, and I went there with my mother. She was going there for work, and I accompanied her, and I started learning Mandarin when I was 16. And that was not the trend in America. At the time, everybody was learning Japanese. And I went back and forth when I was in school. I had internships there. I never lived there longer than a year when I was researching a cultural project on my own. But otherwise, working there, having a lot of friends there, and every time I go to China, and that's something very special for me, I feel very much like I'm coming home, which is a very strange, and that was what inspired this movie. I hadn't gone back for 7 years, and I went back with my family, and I felt like I had come home. And why have I been away for so long? This is my home. It's a very strange feeling. It's a very deep connection with a place. And what was the other? What was the other question?
Well, no, I mean that was basically it. It was your connection to China and kind of writing that world that you're familiar with. And if you're saying that has a feel of home to you, then it makes perfect sense that you wanted to tell a story there. So you know, the film, again, I've heard that it took maybe 4 years from the idea to completion. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when you wrote it, were you in China or were you in the United States or?
I had gone to China with my family on a holiday, and then I stayed alone for a couple of weeks to reconnect with friends that I've known for, and I think I have maybe half a dozen friends that I've been close to for 20 years in China, which is not the case anywhere else. So it's very strange. Wow. And some of them are Chinese, and some of them are foreigners living in China. It's a mix. But I stayed on, and then I had a very strange experience with a masseur. And I experienced this kind of male aggression, which I hadn't experienced before because I'd been away for a while. And this inspired the screenplay, the story. I had an experience with a blind masseur 20 years ago, and I tried to make that into a story, and it wasn't really working, wasn't really gelling. So the idea had been circling around for a while, but it really took off when I went there. And then I spent. I'd interviewed maybe 100 when I decided the storyline, the basic storyline. I wrote the first draft to refine it and to make it more deeper and real. I spent a long time in China writing it. So I interviewed, I think, 150 blind masseurs over a period of a month or so to get into the details of their life and their difficulties. And just at that time, there was a movie which came out by a very famous art director in China on blind massage. And there had never been a movie on including them or about them. I was so upset. I mean, he's one of the top art directors in China, but it was interesting. So the film is obviously not about him and his life, but I did want to capture as much as I could that was realistic. And although I have my own experiences as an expat in China, I have never applied for permanent residency. So I did interview a lot of expats who had gone through that process. And I did that in person. Sometimes I did that through the phone back when I was in the US. I was writing the whole time when I was in the US as well. I have a family here, and so I couldn't be full-time in China. I would say in the beginning, 30% of the time in China, and then 50% of the time. And then eventually when I was shooting, there was 1 year where I was 60, 70% of the time in China.
And how long was the shoot in China?
40 days without stopping, without a break.
Wow. And the city that you guys were located, I mean, I'm not familiar with, what I saw on the screen looked really beautiful. It looked like a place, that was, I'd love to go visit that. Where were you?
Yeah, it's funny because I hadn't known, of all the times I've been in China, I had never known of the place either. It's a small resort town east of Beijing. You can take a train there from Beijing, and it's called Beidaihe. And it's actually where all the government officials go for like weekend conferences or meetings or to sign important documents, this kind of thing. This sort of, and so it was very challenging to shoot there. Initially, my production team did not want to shoot there. They kept on scouting around the town. And I was like, wait, what's that? That's what I want. Because why it's so difficult to shoot there is because because there's so many government officials living there. Every day, the road closures and the direction of the roads were changing without any announcement. There was no schedule. It was for security reasons. And so, and also, there was a park I wanted to shoot in, but it was right next to where, the premier has his summer residence. So we couldn't shoot there. So it's very, very complicated to shoot. On top of everything else, it's very complicated to shoot there. And I originally wanted to shoot in Qingdao because it has an influence of, long influence of Europeans settling there, and its beautiful German architecture. That's where the beer is made, Qingdao beer, because the Germans actually left behind their beer factory. The Chinese took it over. So Beidaihe also has what Qingdao has, and that's why I really loved it. It has a little bit of this. There's some Western architecture there. And I thought for the story, it's really quite fitting. This mix of Eastern and Western.
Yeah.
We don't have much of. We didn't keep a lot of the exterior shots, but yeah, there's this flavor. There are a lot of Russians living there, but it's not. What was important was that it was a small, isolated town, which in the winter is also very empty, other than the government officials, which is important for the character of Fei Fei because she feels very isolated. Yeah. If she's living in Beijing or Shanghai or Hong Kong, it's easy not to feel like in New York City, it's easy not to feel lonely.
Sure. I'm going to get back to the isolation question here in a second, but I think this is a good little segue into filmmaking in China. And I kind of wanted to get your take on this. We all know how much of a struggle it is for female directors in Hollywood, right? Yes. What is the perception of a female director, or how is that take in the Chinese film industry? And was there any added resistance to you being a quote unquote Westerner?
Yeah, there was huge resistance. The idea was, how can you, and we're hearing that a lot now, right? How can a white man tell a black woman's story, right? We're hearing that right now. And the same was there. How could this white woman tell a Chinese story? And they kept on seeing the story as Zhanghua's story, which is interesting because all the people around me were men. I mean, unfortunately, I wish there were more women. I didn't orchestrate it this way, but it happened. All the investors, all the production managers, this kind of thing, were all men. My team was Chinese men. And so they actually couldn't see it as Fei Fei's story. They had a block to the fact that it was Fei Fei's story. They kept on thinking it was Zhanghua's story. And I said, no, it's not really Zhanghua's story. Then it was for sure Bayu's story. I said, no, it's not Bayu's story. It's Fei Fei's story. So there was that initial hurdle with the story, just the story in itself, that, why do we want a story about a woman and a Caucasian woman in China? And then the idea was, how can you as a white Western woman, write about a Chinese man? What do you know about a Chinese man? Or what do you know about a blind masseur? So there was from the writing perspective, even from the beginning, there was a lot of resistance. As far as directing, the project was, I had to hold on to my own project as a director. It was, a few times people tried to take it away from me. My own projects, this was a very stressful experience. But the fact that I was a Western woman did, in China, I think there's a greater trust of Westerners. They don't trust each other as much as they trust Westerners. So this was my advantage. And then also as a woman, a Western woman is actually is perceived a little bit more in a masculine light than a Chinese woman. So those were my two advantages, I would say.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, I just think that the struggle would be so unique. I mean, I'm sure you've got.
I intend to write a book about it. I mean,
right.
Go on hours about the struggle.
I mean, I would think that it would be very. I mean, tell me this: like, is there a lot of government oversight into film projects? I mean, are you being looked at, or you watched when you're making art in China?
Yeah. Well, there's a censorship process from the script. There are films which are not going through censorship, and they're called black market films. And but then it's harder to get talent. It's harder to get people on the project because you could get in trouble for that. And then you can't show your film anywhere. You can't show it anywhere. If you show it anywhere, then that's a second level of trouble. So if you don't pass censorship, you need to pass censorship at the script level to get a shooting permit and to attract talent. Once you shoot it, then you need another level of censorship. And then what's funny in China is that the laws change every 3 months regarding that. Oh. So what they thought was okay screenplay wise, 8 months later, once it's finished, might not be okay suddenly. So there's this challenge. I don't know if they're watching, on a more. That's as far as I know. Was there somebody on set from the government? Maybe. I mean, who knows? This I don't know. But there's increasingly, it's actually becoming increasingly difficult to make black market films and to pass censorship. And we had just squeezed through the last moment, for example, when censorship was decentralized. So there was a Shanghai censorship, the Beijing censorship, every city had its own, and town had its own. And then just when we passed it, they centralized it to Beijing, which makes it harder. Makes it much harder. There are far more scripts. You can't really, pass through the cracks. You can't bribe anyone. You can't, all these things. It's much more controlled, closer to the government. So, and that's what they're doing all the time. I mean, they're not, all of these rules and everything can be bent. They're bending them all the time and finding cracks through them. Sure. So it's a matter of who who your fixer knows in the government and that kind of thing to get it passed, basically. So it's very complicated.
When you were making this, were you thinking that this was going to be primarily for a Chinese audience or a foreign audience, an American audience? I mean, for me, I see it as like, oh, this is for Americans, but yeah. Is it 50-50 or is it more for the Chinese market versus the United States market?
Well, I was hoping, I mean, when I write and make stories, I really don't think of the audience because for me that's, and some people do, purely commercial writers, directors do, and, studios do, but I think it really stifles creativity in an interesting story. So I can't think of that. But once I wrote it, the question arose of whether to make it in English or Chinese, because everybody saw it as a Western story, and I wanted to sell it in the West and have a career in the West. So it should be in English. And I very much resist, obviously in the end, I resisted this completely because it's not organic to the story. And it would, when I see stories like that are shot abroad and they're all in English with accents, for example, it takes me out. It completely takes me out. So it loses its authenticity. And I don't believe that all cinema should be one day in English in 50, 70 years. I totally resist this idea.
Yeah.
So there was that. And I was hoping that it would touch a little bit of the Chinese audience. But once I finished it, I saw the Chinese reaction, and there's a tiny segment it will touch, which is the young art filmmaker, kind of alternative group, which is tiny. I showed it to distributors. It did not resonate. It did not resonate with the Chinese, and there was many, many reasons why. And from even the basic way I shot it, and I got a resistance when I was shot planning and planning the whole film, was that they really don't like handheld camera. They find it unprofessional and sloppy looking. So they couldn't even actually believe when I was shot listing that I wanted to be handheld. I said, no, it's going to be all handheld. And so what the production manager did to my horror, was he ordered tracks anyway, which are really expensive.
Yeah.
And so suddenly there was these tracks on the budget. I said, what is that? Well, for sure you were going to, no, but I said I wasn't. Well, that's impossible to shoot a film handheld. And I said, no, it's not. It's not impossible. Look at all the European cinema. Look at half of American indie cinema. It's not impossible. It's what we do. No, it's not professional. It's not going to look good. And so there was, I mean, it was like every small thing was really a battle. And that's, you know, the way it's shot is in itself is the darkness of it. Even the lighting is not done in a way that Chinese do their films. They like to, well, they don't shot list. And so what happens is which is a whole nother huge problem. They don't shot list. And so what they do instead to have enough coverage is they have 2 cameras going at the same time. But if you have 2 cameras, then, because there's no plan, right? This shot list is the plan, is the blueprint for the film. And if you don't have a blueprint, you've got to cover yourself a little bit. So they have 2 cameras. And so that was another struggle. I just want 1 camera. What do you mean you just want 1 camera? I said, no, I just want 1 camera. I don't need 2 cameras. And then if you have 2 cameras, you need to blow the whole thing out light-wise. So it becomes like a sitcom. You know, in sitcoms, that's why you have 5, 6 cameras. And the whole thing is flat lighting, because you can't have you know, shadowy lighting and a camera from the other side. It doesn't work. So the lighting was an issue. The number of cameras was an issue. It was shot totally not in the way that Chinese are used to seeing films. And so their reaction to the technical aspects of the film, the visual, just how it looks, and then also the story and people's motivations. They didn't understand Fei Fei at all. They didn't understand Fei Fei at all, which I found very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, all of it's fascinating. I don't know how you can actually shoot a film without shot listing. That's
yes.
And so but you were able to get it your way. You were saying, I want to use 1 camera and I'm going to actually plan this out. Like you lit it the way you wanted it to have the lights and everything. And you took it. You didn't go the Chinese route. You went your route.
No. Yes, I had to.
You had to. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there were compromises I did make, which, you know, screenplay wise, like, which some of them worked in the end very well. Like I ended up, you know, fleshing out Zhang Hua, the husband, a lot more than I originally wanted. I wanted it to be more about Baiyu and Fei Fei. Mm-hmm. And in the end, because of the acting and things like this and the way we cut it, it worked to the film's advantage. It was a good thing in the end, but it was not, you know, the film was never about Zhang Hua, the husband, Zhang Hua. So, you know, I had to make compromises here and there to satisfy my investors and the people involved in the film. But no, I mean, even rehearsal was, you know, I had to fight to get rehearsals.
Wow.
You know, so there's nobody rehearses. I said, well, I'm going to rehearse. And if I don't rehearse, you know, we're going to end up spending. And that's the thing. So a lot of films in China also aren't finished and run over budget like 400%. So also when I said I want 40 days, they said, no. How about we tell everyone it's going to be 30 days? Because you're going to go over anyway. I said, no, I know it's 40 days. I know what I need. It's 40 days. I'm not going to go over. And so I said, this is like cheating myself. I'm not going to write 30 when I know it's going to be 40. And so this was a problem as well. And of course we shot 40 days because I know my pace. And I've made short films, and short films are not much different than feature films. There's a lot more people, a lot more money on the table. It's like, you know, running a marathon versus sprinting, but it's basically the same.
This, just hearing these stories, like I could feel my blood pressure going up. Like it was so stressful.
No, I ended up in the hospital at the end with a panic attack. I'm not joking.
No.
After the 4 years, I ended up in the hospital.
Oh no.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, so I almost died. I can legitimately say I almost died making this film. I really did. In many ways.
Wow.
And there's also the needle scene. Remember the needle scene?
Mm-hmm.
So there was supposed to be a doctor there. A doctor was there, and he didn't think to mention that these needles, you know, on fire. They're needles on fire actually in my body. That they have a maximum. They should be there for 20 minutes only. Otherwise, it starts to get dangerous.
Yeah.
So after like an hour, maybe the DP asked the doctor, how long should these needles be there? He said, oh, usually maximum 20 minutes. And they were like, get the needles out. And I was like, wait, do we have the shot?
Right.
And then I had pains in my stomach for 3 months afterwards.
Oh.
And I went to go check that I didn't damage my organs, you know?
Yeah.
This was Yeah,
Talk
living
about a passion project. I mean,
talk about a passion project.
Yeah. So I wanted, to ask you about wearing the hats of a writer, a director, and acting. I mean, you're in the film. How did you manage that? I mean, there's so many people, and I've tried it myself in just short films, and it's an extreme challenge. And you have all this stress that you just talked about, and then you're putting on, I got to be an actor now, I got to be a director, and then I'm writing this out. How did you manage it?
There were moments where it was extremely difficult, and I would say that the most difficult part of it was the fact that I was my own producer. So there was nobody between me and the money guys, and we all know the money guys can be difficult, and they're not. The thing a producer does is they're the cheerleader for the project. They vouch for the project. They protect the director and their vision. They buffer them against, everything that goes on the other side of the table. And so when you're on your own producer, there's no buffering and there's nobody protecting you. You're protecting yourself the whole time. So for me, that was the worst part of it, which luckily subsided once we started shooting. So it was just to the day before shooting, it was a huge problem. And at the end, it was a huge problem. But during the shooting, it was actually a very joyful experience. And it was very smooth to be my own director and actor because I'd done it 4 times before in short films. So I think once you've practiced sort of your own, you have a sense of your own rhythm and technique, and I know how long it takes, and I know when I want to see the replay and when I don't need to. Most of the time I want to see it, but sometimes I would know, okay, we're running short. It was fine. It's a simple shot. I don't need to see it. And I know my pace, and it's unfortunately a little bit slower than if, I'm just the director or I'm just the actor. So it is a little bit slower, but I do know what to expect, and I know how to, accommodate for that.
Cool. Let's go back to the character, your character in the movie.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that your character is dealing with extreme isolation, and in this world that we're living in now with a pandemic and families moving to a foreign country, they're immigrants here. There's isolation in that sense too. So it's all very relatable. I mean, we understand that world, and when you watch it, you're just like, oh, I kind of get it. But what interested you in this idea and this mental state of being?
I feel maybe because I feel so close to China, and I feel I do speak the language, and I've read all the classical texts that, the most educated person in China has read. I feel, and yet sometimes, well, most of the time, especially with the people I was around when making the film, you can never get. It's so frustrating because you're never let in. There's a feeling of never being let in, and almost even being mocked sometimes and being made fun. Your Chinese will never be good enough, and your knowledge of the culture will never be good enough, and you will always be an outsider. And so I think this. I'm originally from Poland as well, and I live in America. And I do, even though I came to America when I was 3 years old. I still feel that as well in America. I think it's my permanent state of being, is always feeling a little bit outside, never understanding how to fully get in. And so I thought, because my connection with China, I thought it'd be interesting to explore in China what that would be like to be married there and to never be accepted fully.
Yeah.
And also my very close friends still speak to me sort of as you in plural, you guys. I said, what do you mean you guys? What about me? You guys. I'm not part of you guys. I'm not, you Westerners, basically. So there's always this, which is very upsetting for me,
Sure.
So it came from this. And then the general storyline as far as the thriller and a man versus a woman came from a completely separate idea, which was I had a couple of friends who are filmmakers, playwrights, etc., who are Chinese Americans, and they're fascinated with they really wanted to see a Western woman dominated by a Chinese man. And this goes into deep psychological issues of Chinese masculinity, which are fascinating. And so I was reading a lot about this. Why do they need to see this? Why do they want to see this? Why is this even interesting? And so I tried to craft a story. So there were a lot of inspirations which came together, including the Chinese masseur, etc. But in my time in China, but then it was always in the back of my mind, how could I depict a Chinese man dominating a Western woman? And so in this thriller situation where he's terrorizing her, where Bayu is terrorizing her, and the husband has a bit of a thumb over his wife, these were two different situations where I thought it'd be interesting to see, what does a Western woman do in these circumstances? What does a woman, I mean, she's really a woman, a Western, she's really a woman, right? What does a woman do in these circumstances? So that's how that part came. That's how the thriller part came around.
Well, you did a remarkable job. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad we're playing it in the festival.
Honor, thank you.
What are your plans for the film after the festival? I mean, do you have distribution lined up? What are your hopes for it?
I didn't have distribution before shooting. I just started to look into distribution. I got a sales agent a few months ago. So we are trying to sell it. Hasn't been sold yet. It's been partially sold. Well, it's in discussions now, so I don't think I'm allowed to talk about it. Partially sold, but yeah, I would like as many people as possible to see it. I'd love to get distribution, worldwide distribution. So these are my plans for it.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, great. Again, thank you so much for being with us. We hope to see you in person with your next film. Speaking of which, what are you working on now? Is there something we can look forward to in the future?
Yeah, I had a project because of COVID put on hold, but it might be revived, which is sort of the realistic reply to Crazy Rich Asians. So it's sort of about excess and addiction in China. Which is rampant, a lot of alcoholism and this sort of thing. It's sort of the darker, more real story behind the Crazy Rich Asians. My take on it, anyway. So there was that project, and it was going to be shot all over Asia, because that's what they do. They travel and have these investment deals here in Malaysia and all over Asia. But it's not really fitting for the current tone. I think people struggling financially and this kind of thing, and also you can't travel. I can't travel. So I'm working on another project, which is more, which is closer to home. It's inspired by my father, just inspired. So it's a little bit different, but it's looking at somebody who's 70 years old, who's been married for 50 years, who suddenly decides to leave his wife for an unconsummated sweetheart love, from his high school. And he's an immigrant. So it also requires him leaving the country and everything behind to go back to this love of his. So I was looking at aging and, this sort of, I love these kinds of films.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, great. I can't wait to see what you do next. And again, we hope to see you in Fort Worth one day.
I'd love to come, yeah.
So,
I used to live in Houston. I used to live in Houston.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh.
I used to be in the energy business. I used to work for Shell.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So I used to live in Houston.
I
love it. I love it. It's actually the most international city, Houston anyway.
Yeah.
At about fourth, it was the most international city in the entire U.S., which makes it very exciting.
It is a pretty good town.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Aleksandra. We appreciate it, and all the best.
Thank you.
Se dama o hidalgo, tenga transforma nada en algo. Échale un ojo a suerte, puedes conseguir lo que deseas. Suerte negra está disfrazada por un beso que te dio.
Forgive me, my love.
Aleksandra Szczepanowska's film Touch can be screened online now at the Lone Star Film Festival through Sunday. Make sure to check it out. I'm Chad Matthews. Thanks for watching.